Welcome to the Last Talk Show. Tonight we'll be talking to Leonard Maltin about Some Like It Hot.
All the way from the island of Nantucket, Massachusetts, it's the Last Talk Show. The Last Talk Show.
Can I ask you about South Park just by chance? Was that you were on? You provided the voice, or no?
I was depicted on an episode of South Park. I turned into a robot and helped defeat the Mecha Streisand. So not only was I on South Park, but I was in a heroic role. I wasn't made fun of. I thought I came out pretty well out of that. And I only learned about it 2 weeks before it aired. So I had nothing to do with voicing myself. And when people ask if I gave permission, I say, yeah, I gave the same permission Barbra Streisand did.
Right.
But that episode, which is very early in the run of South Park, is still in their rotation. And it's the best PR I've ever had.
I wanted to ask you what your top drive-in movies would be.
I grew up in the era of drive-ins in the 50s and 60s. I remember I grew up in northern New Jersey, Teaneck, New Jersey, in Bergen County. And the next town over was Paramus, and there was the Paramus drive-in. And my parents would pack my brother and me up in the car in our pajamas and take us to the movies in the hope that we would eventually get tired and fall asleep. And so that experience, although later I went on my own, but when you say drive-in to me, I immediately say to myself, mosquitoes. Because in those days, you had to keep the window open a little bit in order to accommodate the speaker that had kind of a lip that was held in place by the window. So mosquitoes could and did get in.
So Some Like It Hot. This movie is listed as as the #1 comedy on the American Film Institute's list. Is it the #1 comedy? And if not, what are your top 5 #1 comedies?
I would place this at the very top. Now, I don't want to create a show me attitude, where people are going to cross their arms and say, oh yeah, let's see how good you are.
Right.
I think this would meet that test, but it's never a good idea, like showing students Citizen Kane and saying, oh, this is the greatest film ever made. Now you watch it. It's an invitation to hate the movie. Whereas this being a comedy, I think there's somewhat less at stake than saying, it's the best ever. It's just such a well-written, such a wonderfully performed comedy in the hands of the director-writer Billy Wilder and his writing partner I.A.L. Diamond. They hit a gold mine here, and they cast it extremely well. Again, as in most good Hollywood movies, not just the stars, but the supporting players as well. And I just watched some of it on Turner Classic Movies a couple of weeks ago, and I still laugh. I know the lines are coming, but I still laugh. It gets me every time.
What do we need to know about Some Like It Hot?
Not very much going in. I think it sets the time and place very well. It's late 1920s Chicago during the Prohibition era. Prohibition, if you don't know, was otherwise known as the Volstead Act, was enacted by Congress by, I think, well-meaning people who didn't think through the effects that denying Americans access to liquor would have. They certainly didn't intend for it to fuel an underworld, full of violence and intimidation and gangsterism. That was not their intent, but that is what happened. And Chicago seems to have been the capital of all of that. And there was an infamous shooting in a garage that was known as the St. Valentine's Day Massacre. And that's what sets this story in motion. That was a real event.
It came out in 1959. This is Eisenhower's America. It's a pretty conservative time in the country. Talk to us about, I read about the Hays Code, but also some of the themes that this movie like celebrates, jumps into, and what the reaction was in 1959.
The reaction was laughter. It was a big hit, a big hit movie, much applauded and much celebrated. You should know that at the time, Tony Curtis was a bigger star than Jack Lemmon. Tony Curtis was on an incredible winning streak, and with good cause. He was at his peak as a performer and made one terrific movie after another. Jack Lemmon was still climbing the ladder to the ultimate success he enjoyed, and this film put him on the very top of that ladder. And he and Billy Wilder reteamed the following year for another great film, an Oscar-winning film called The Apartment. And that cemented Jack Lemmon's place in the pantheon of movie stars. But Tony Curtis was billed, top billed. Jack Lemmon and Marilyn Monroe was reaching the end of her career, sad to say. Billy Wilder had worked with her once before in a very funny movie called The 7-Year Itch. So he had experience with her. She was a very insecure woman, in spite of her beauty and charisma. And she made it very tough. Again, I don't want people to go into this movie thinking, about sad thoughts or negative thoughts. But she went into this movie believing in Billy Wilder and believing in the screenplay and the part of Sugar Cane. But she was difficult to work with, often late, often absent.
Yeah.
And Billy Wilder said something like, I'm paraphrasing, I have an aunt, Matilda, who shows up promptly every day, but nobody pays money to see her. So, in short, it was worth the trouble to get Marilyn Monroe to give this performance.
It was shot in black and white, though obviously color film was available at the time. Why?
It cost less to make a movie in black and white. The film stock itself and the developing of the film stock and the making of prints, all of that was a cost-cutting economy measure, and color was reserved for more spectacular movies. Ben-Hur the same year, for instance, for films that had beautiful and exotic backgrounds, for epic westerns. That's where, and musicals, that's where you saw color more frequently. The Apartment was also in black and white.
Right.
So it was not uncommon at that time. And nobody saw it as a negative.
Right.
No one in the audience said, "Oh, gee, I have to watch a black and white movie." They were used to watching black and white television. Color television was still, on its way toward acceptance, wide acceptance with the American public.
Yeah, it seemed like they really worked on the authenticity of playing women. And I had read they hired someone named Barbette. Do you know anything about Barbette and the process of these guys getting into the roles?
Yeah, I know a little bit. I interviewed both Tony Curtis and Jack Lemmon, as well as Mr. Wilder, at a screening of this film many years ago that was sponsored by the American Film Institute. It was one of the thrills of my life.
Yeah.
And then later I interviewed Tony Curtis at length and that interview appears on the DVD and Blu-ray edition of Some Like It Hot. And he was very specific about how he and Jack Lemmon at first said, no one's going to buy it. No one's going to believe for a minute that we could get away with pretending to be women, real women, not drag queens. And so when they finished their ultimate costume, wardrobe, makeup tests, they were at the Samuel Goldwyn studio, and they went into the ladies' restroom, and nobody said a word.
Wow.
And that's when they knew that maybe they were onto something. Maybe they could get away with this.
I was going to ask you, just for viewers who don't know Billy Wilder, is there like the 1-minute tutorial on Billy?
Well, he was Austrian born, and like many other great people of Hollywood, came here as an immigrant to flee the Nazis in the 1930s. He went to Paris first, and London, and then finally here. He learned English by watching American movies, and then became not only conversant in the language, but a great wit. He knew how to use the language to his great benefit, and he wrote a lot of successful movie scripts with his first partner, Charles Brackett, and then later with I.A.L. Diamond. And he became a director because he got frustrated with the director's interpretation of his scripts. And he said, I've had enough. So in order to keep control of his work, he chose to be a director. And it turned out to be a very good one.
So as far as the writing process goes, the last line was also a placeholder in this. I guess, again, with spoilers, I don't know if this ruins anything, but they had a last line as a placeholder, and then they never got around to changing it. It was, what happened?
They knew it was good enough. They knew not to tamper with success.
Do you have
the other thing that Billy Wilder felt, and I know that his contemporary Joseph L. Mankiewicz, the man who made All About Eve, they both wanted to end their films with not just a punchline, but with a memorable moment. Maybe it would be a swell of music, maybe it would be a funny line of dialogue. And that's what they wanted audiences to have in their consciousness as they walked up the aisle and left the theater. Because, as you'll see, there are no credits following the words "the end." They didn't do endless credits with a roll that would last 10 minutes that tells you who all the drivers were and who sharpened the pencils. That started in the 70s. And while it gives appropriate credit to all the people who work very hard to make a movie, and no one begrudges them that, it does kind of dilute the impact of a great closing moment.
Yeah, and now there's always something after the credits, so you have to watch them.
I tell my students at USC, the movie isn't over till you've been threatened with civil and criminal prosecution.
Do you have I was going to ask you just about Marilyn. Do you have a favorite Marilyn story?
I think this is one of her best performances, and it shows her at her very best. And she's so beautiful here.
Let's pause for a minute and watch the 1985 supergroup The Power Station song, featuring members of Duran Duran, Robert Palmer, and Chic, their song Some Like It Hot. Some like it hot, and some fry when the heat is on. Some like it hot, and they don't know when it's gone. Some like it hot, some like it hot. What do you think of that song? Do you remember that song or care?
I don't remember it, I have to confess.
this series of conversations brought to us by Muzak.org, which is a 501c3 that supports kids' music programs. We're just asking for some tips for kids brought to you by Muzak.
Come on, guys, help the kids out. Go to Muzak.org. No, that's the way you spell it.
What's your tips for kids who want to become writers?
Would-be writers should read. Read everything and anything. Read fiction, read short stories as well as novels. Read some published screenplays if you're really that interested in the craft of screenwriting. But really, before screenwriting comes storytelling, a broader word. And I don't know if you can learn to tell a good story, but if it can be learned, it can only be learned by the diligence of reading everything that you possibly can.
I'm gonna do a quick last talk show lightning round. Last time you were starstruck?
I got to share a stage just before at the very end of the last calendar year with Robert De Niro and Martin Scorsese. And though I had met and interviewed them both before, the combined intensity and power of having them, 2 feet away from me as I interviewed them for 45 minutes was pretty incredible.
Last time you were inspired by something?
I'm inspired by people who have used this quarantine time to create things. Not just using it resourcefully, but using it creatively. That inspires me.
So this talk show obviously is one of the big new inspirations for you, I'm sure. We're making
Goes without saying.
But the last movie that really surprised you and took you off guard?
Well, that movie Lingua Franca, which is the first film I've seen by a transgender filmmaker who also is the star and writer.
Yeah.
And it's playing on Netflix, and it's a very impressive movie by a woman named Isabel Sandoval.
Finally, the last movie that made you cry?
I cry at supermarket openings. I'm a softie, so it would be too many to name.
And Leonard, finally, I'll give you the last word on Some Like It Hot. Anything else to add?
Enjoy it. Just surrender to it and enjoy it.
Thank you so much. They're going to love this.
Good. I'm glad. I hope they don't see it as an intrusion.
No, this is way better. They've been playing ads for local businesses. This is such an upgrade. So.
Well, that's a small compliment.
But thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Take care.